Thank you for the opportunity of being here, and hope that it is justifiable. And I will welcome all your questions and try to do my best to express my thoughts on the matter.
Okay, then I would just start the fire, so to get ourselves like warmed up. There are many interesting things of what you say, but for me, it's always complicated to understand when we use the word ethics related to performance. I think it is a very interesting thing to bring this idea, but it is not easy to understand, probably because we have many definitions of ethics, or not everyone is working with the same definition of ethics. I seem to understand, let me just correct me if I'm wrong, that you talk about the process being more important than the outcome, and this attention to the process being part of this ethics. And then ethics could be understood in the original Greek sense of like the Latin mores, like the way you do things. So it's more connected with the way of doing things, because there's also the possibility that it might be mistaken by someone with the idea of this kind of a bit more deontological meaning of the ethics. For example, like when we say the ethics in I don't know, in medicine or something like that, or in biology. It's maybe a different type of ethics.
Yes. So I will try to answer giving you an example of a lecture I saw maybe 10 years ago or something like that by Bart Kauken. And he gave a very interesting thought experience. Let me see if I can recall it correctly. He told us to think about a kind of a diagram with two axes, the X and Y. And in one of the axes, you would put in one point of the spectrum the composer, and the other point of the spectrum the audience. And in the other part of the axis, you would put on one side of the spectrum the performer, and the other side of the spectrum the score. His invitation is that each one of us will think more or less, how do we position in this diagram? So if a performer, we are more self-centered in what we want to express, or in the other way around, if you are more concerned about what might be, and this is a very light expression that I'm using, because I won't agree with this definition, but it's a kind of something that a locus topic, commonplace. So the intention of the composer. This is expression that I don't like, but it's given for the sake of the clarification of the example. Or if you want to be more in your performer behavior, more engaged with the idea that you have to rapture the attention of the composer, of the audience, or if you are very self-centered and want to express your critical thoughts of the work that you are performing without regarding the opinion of the audience. So I think each one of us, if we make this exercise, we will find where we position ourselves. And we can also even see that the institutions and even countries or stylistic performative habits associated to the way Italians play, even today, I'm not speaking historically, English people play, etc. You will find that many different perspectives, postures. So maybe that's what I mean by the ethics. What are your goals? What are your priorities? And how do you position in this very large scheme? Because such decisions that might be more or less conscious will have impact, for instance, on your performative career, because something that is more or less clear is that if you want to have a successful career, you need to agree with a certain convention and expectations of how early music should sound today. Otherwise, you won't get a good reaction from concert organizers. So this is, in short, what I mean by the ethics of the performer. I would put just to finish, I would put also taking the model of Bart Kauken thought experience, I would put a different axis, which is the end goal. And just in the last session, in the end, there was this issue brought. So if concerts or CDs should be the benchmark by which we measure our success, or the process, the thought process. Something that I'm more and more fascinated about is the idea of the mindset. So now this is my personal positioning, my personal ethics, is that I'm not so concerned about if I'm going to make great concerts or CDs, but I'm very concerned, maybe even a little bit obcecated, of how my mindset changes, how my relationship with music changes, both as a listener and as a performer, if I just undertake the training models that I can see from the past and learn about from the past. And my almost, let's say that for me, this line has been more or less clear for the last 10 years. Maybe this is something that I've been searching all my life without knowing it, but it became clear for me in the last 10 years. And I see that it's modulating a lot the way I think music, I perceive music, and I communicate about music.
Thank you. Now can we have maybe someone from the participants, Straton, Teresa, Michael, if any one of you want to introduce some idea, ask something? You can just, in that case, unmute yourselves.
Hi.
Hello.
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 Hello. This is I think the wider the ethic in music, it's something very wide, and this is the question of some kind of general approach to play. For me, it's always the question, because I'm from this generation, and from my roots were when I was growing, it was in the deep communism times, in the between the Iron Curtain, and well, to be a musician was something extremely well, it could have kind of the possibility to go to the somewhere else, not living just thinking only about the very basic things like buying food, which was just very problems with buying anything, buying shoes, I don't know. And being a musician in the time was kind of make the idealistic thing. So the music was something much higher than the normal life, and it was the light in the dark times. And of course, afterwards, everything has changed. And situation now in Poland is okay. It's not a problem. It's just a normal country. It's life. It's very, very easy. And what I see, for instance, in my students, they absolutely have no this kind of missing word. This kind of ethic, let's say, that the music, with the music we could do something more for them, for my students. It's also what I wanted to ask others, you others, for the students to being a musician. It's only they are on most of them, of course not everybody, but a lot too much for me. Too much of them is interesting only to get some contacts. They got to the conservatoire, to the music academy to get some contacts, and going have jobs. And they don't have, and I'm feeling sometimes like a dinosaur, because for me, making music, it's something that it's the idea, it's the fun. And what did you meet with this problem? That's the situation, that's problems, this isn't problem, this is situation, that's the students, the others. Of course, I see also the same situation with my colleagues, that they are interested only in earning money, going a lot of gigs, but not really interested in something deeper, in some context. What was on the previous session, a lot of I'm totally agree that the context, it's what I'm starting to teach now in teaching not only Baroque violin, but also the interpretation for any music. We have this subject. And I'm trying to put just the very big attention on the context and all the situation around. On the I could talk too much, but the biggest thing is that the ethic of the playing, not only just but because for me being a musician is something bigger than, I don't know, plumber. So that I'm not working from 8 till 5 and earn money, then go back home and and watch TV. We are all the time. I'm all the time inside. I can switch off my thinking about it. What is the problem sometimes? Sorry, too long, too many things, but well, thank you.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Pedro, do you want to take on this, to address some part of it, or to just to state your view?
Yes, I think what Teresa is saying raises a very, very interesting question that I did not address in my communication, because it was about the specifics of early music. But this is a very general question that, of course, conditions how we work, because we are social beings. And we have always been social beings in historical times and today. So I think, again, from what Teresa says, we can find two sides of a very large spectrum. So in one point, we can put our, let's say, personal mission, personal quest, our spiritual, if you want to put it in this way, relation with music. What music means to us, we could also even say from an ontological perspective as human beings. And the other side of the spectrum is that we all have bills to pay and we need to eat food. And music is also a profession that gives access to making those things. So in our paths, now in our paths, I would say, both as individuals, students, teachers in institutions, but also institutions itself, we have to decide how far we can sacrifice one for the other, or we are willing to do so. And it is so Teresa takes a very personal statement and very strong statement. We can see that, for instance, this, I don't know, I'm sorry, Teresa, if I'm presuming things that you didn't want to communicate, but from your declaration, it seems that you are very focused for yourself in the idea of music as your personal mission, that is very strong for you. But also you start your communication by saying that in your country, music was a possibility of getting, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm assuming things from your declaration, a better life, or to achieve things that otherwise you could not.
And so, not only, but just make some hope from the very, very practical thing. It was like you could, as a musician, you could go abroad. Without this, you couldn't. But it was also some kind of I don't know, beauty, something more spiritual, something depth.
May I say that it provided some sort of escape also, yeah, from a situation that is not ideal, even if it's an interior escape, even if it's a bit interior. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks.
And of course, I see that, and I agree that there is a big evolution on the society about what music is. And from my personal experience, I have. I usually tell this little story. It won't take long. It's 3 moments from my life where I witnessed the same situation with 3 different answers. The first was the child with 17 years old, or the adolescent that wants to study music. And this was more or less 20, 30 years ago. And he goes to the father and says, "Father, I want to study music." And the answer is, "No, of course, you're not going to study music. You're going to become a lawyer." The second situation, these are all real events that I'm speaking about, so it's a real anecdote. The second, it's 10, 15 years later, the same, not the same person, but the same person with a similar age go to the father and says, "Father, I decided what I become with my life. And the father says, "What is coming here?" And he says, "I want to be a musician." And the father was a university teacher of mathematics, replies, "Oh my God, I thought you were going to say that you wanted to become a lawyer." And the third situation, 10 years after that, is a person that it was actually my student. She said, "Father, I want to become a lawyer." He said, "No, you're going to become a musician." Yes, so these are three real events from my personal situation. So also this kind, we are social beings and the situation changes. It's something that we need to live with, to adapt it to. We cannot escape our social circumstance, no? And just to address one of the last points that Teresa said that I think it's very interesting, we also have to think that institutions, schools are also social entities. And we, as institutions, we have to struggle with this dilemma, which is maybe stronger in some and less stronger in others, of the training we want to give, and the training directly concerned to the music skills, to the achievement of music goals, but also to a training to the professional world. Many institutions are already pre-professional ambients. I just, a couple of weeks ago, I met a singer. She's a student at my school. She was for 1 year studying in a very famous institution. I won't say the name, it's not important, a very important institution in Europe. And she said that there is her singing teacher there would only have the expectation from lesson to lesson that she would present something like it would be in an audition for an opera or a concert. So every lesson was the simulacrum of a situation in which you are fighting for a job, let's say like that. And she was very frustrated about that, because she's saying that she did not learn a lot. But you also have to understand that in some kind of institutions and in some kind of places, in cities, in countries, this is a very important thing that is going to make a difference between the success or insuccess of the students you have.
Good. I would like to steer a little bit the discussion to a couple of things that you were proposing in your video. You said that early music can be understood as a gateway to the past, to past cultures, to past mindsets. That this thing is, of course, interesting in itself, but also because it helps us to understand our own culture, our own mindsets, and it also enriches our present culture and mindsets and thought processes and etc. And then you mentioned that we have, of course, let's say, historic study, which is a humanistic study, and you mentioned the word Apollinian, like it's something a bit more scientific, a bit more positive, or based on sources, critical study of sources, yeah, a humanistic approach. And then there is this other approach that has to do with the immersion in the sensitive, with the sensitive part that you characterize as more dionysiacal or dionysiacal. And yeah, maybe we could have someone from the participants, Stratton, Teresa, or Michael, commenting on this. Do you think that this is something that can be balanced, or do you put more weight on one or the other? Do you think that these things can coexist at all? And then maybe you can answer after they give their opinions or objections also. Go, Stratton, go.
Can I put in a word?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting hearing this idea of Dionysical, you getting lost in the music, and that in the East Bloc, before the wall came down, that was almost intrinsic to music in any case, because it has this feeling of being able to escape and being able to express things that you wouldn't otherwise. And I mean, looking back at the history of the early music movement, it's interesting that at the same time in the East Bloc that was going on, in a way, it was also going on in the West. That people like the Kirkens and Bruce Haynes and company had a real sense of mission and excitement, and I always have this image of them arguing through the night in the bars, you know, drinking and smoking and reading quants and arguing about that, and it was as if it were life and death somehow. And that's a bit of the dilemma with the early music is of its own success, that that's kind of disappeared a little bit, and the more the Apollonian side has taken over as being it's an industry that that you have to become part of, and you have to get a job, and you have to be rational and follow the rules. And that seems to be the challenge somehow, is how can you have that other kind of fire that's burning. I mean, personally, I think it's all still there. The repertoire is there. There's so much still to discover, but it's just a fact that that sense of excitement that was in that first generation is very hard to, you can't artificially recreate that. And it's a bit of a question mark for me still. I mean, I'm excited by the music still, so that keeps me going. But I think maybe you have to go more to this rational side now in these next stages. And as I say, it remains a question for me how you find that fire that was in the first generation.
Michael, go ahead.
Moment. I think it's our challenge in higher music education, but also our chance to create an ambience where this combination of Dionysian and Apollonian approach is possible. I like very much these two images, and I think, yeah, perhaps it's also the mistake of the early music schools for the past decades, that we went too professional in a way and didn't leave enough space for the dreams, for the developing of ideas. And I think now, perhaps in this very professional world, where perhaps our students sometimes are more professional in a way and more ambitious than us, that we can hold them back and say, look also there, look to the left, look to the right.
Teresa, yeah, please.
What do you mean our students are more professional?
I mean ambitious in a way. So
ambitious.
What you were saying before, that so they want to get the jobs, yeah? They start in this way, okay, I do this, and this. I fulfill all my credit points, so I have the paper, and then I want to be on this level so that when I do an audition for this and that group, I will get the jobs. So this I mean a little bit, yeah.
So more than professional would be sort of like a career
oriented.
Career concerned.
Career orientated.
More concerned with the careers than the pioneers of early music.
Yeah.
Somehow, because what maybe I expressed myself wrong. Sorry for my English, but this is kind of the first generation or second, because I don't know now. I'm from the first generation in Poland. So, and this is what I'm sometimes missing in the young person who are perfectly career orientated. They are really focused, but they are focused on making just money without this deeper part. What I'm missing, that I'm sorry, I asked them recently about they don't know who they don't know name of Gustav Leonhardt. They don't know name of Kaken. And at the same moment they are perfectly very good players, just very professional musicians, but without this something what we somehow have.
But if I may answer directly, I think this might also be our chance to change it again in the conservatory. So we deliver in a way this perfect schedules. They get lectures after lectures. They have access so easily, and they just have to sit there and to eat it all. And perhaps the chance would be to include them again more. So in Graz, we try, for example, a lot to do common projects where also the students are doing lectures for Studientage, for days of studies, so that everybody shares with everybody and they contribute their part as well. I think we have to arise the curiosity in them, and
once coming back to what Pedro said about the heritage and again culture, it's the question about the role of culture in our life. How do we understand it in the wider sense? I mean, is the culture only our field of activity professional, or is something bigger, wider? But it's not unanswered questions, because for me it's not one answer for this question. It's the very big, and this is the thing I think need to think about and find our way to this.
Pedro, would you comment a little bit on the things we were saying, and also if you can to go a little bit deeper with the Apollo Dionysos, because in a practical way, what do you mean also with that?
Okay.
Yeah?
I think all the things that we are saying, we are connecting. I was taking some notes. I'm going to start with the last declaration from Teresa, because she's asking how can we understand the culture. I think we are cultural beings, so we perceive and do experience culture in far more ways that are in our understanding. Every day we are conditioned in our communication with everyone around us by culture events, or by cultural circumstances. So understanding is just a small part of it. And the part that we can understand is far smaller than the part that we perceive. And this is exactly what I mean by the dialogue between Apollo and Dionysus. Of course, this is not my idea. It comes from Nietzsche, you know, the idea that the modernity or the evolution from classical times to modern times and postmodern times has been a kind of transformation in which our main interface with reality goes especially through the conceptual understanding of the world around us, that is through the word, through the verb. And this is how we behave. In our schools are instructive institutions. So didactics is the science of how we teach. Our learning is basically based on receiving instructions of how we should perceive. And we communicate these instructions verbally. But there are many, many other ways of communicating through experience. We can, and we still have that in some cultures around the world. So if you watch, for instance, far from being an expert of that, but correct me if I'm wrong, if you go to see a music lesson in India, it will be completely different from the kind of music lesson we give, in which maybe words are scarcely spoken. For instance, and words, they have, words are much stronger than we think. They bring affections and characters and psychological states with them. For instance, Celebidac says in an interview that is available somewhere on a documentary or on YouTube, I don't remember where, but he says, the word you must repeat in a musical lesson or rehearsal is the word no. And I think if we make a mental revision about that in our personal experience, this is actually happening a lot in a lesson. Don't play like that. This is out of tune. That is a wrong note. Let's make, don't make so much rallentando, etc. So the idea that to instruct something, it's to impose restrictions, it's very ingrained in our culture, and also in the way we communicate about music and how we teach about music, in a dimension that is far greater than our conscious understanding. So this would be the Apollinian side of the vector, not with the negative charge, but just the idea that we communicate through expression instructions in a verbal manner. And in the other side of the spectrum of the vector, we have the idea that we learn through experience. And I have a friend, Vicente Parrilla, you might know him, he's a very good improvisator, and he says improvisation is the opposite of saying no, it's saying yes. For instance, if you are improvising a canon and your student is following the canon that you are improvising, you are not conveying anything verbally, and you are just giving a path that you have to follow in a positive manner. So I'm giving these examples so you can know what can be in the other side of the methodological process. So again, my idea is not to replace the Apollinian perspective from the Dionysian, but just to think that they both exist, and we can you can be more towards one or more towards other as methods, as tools to achieve success in whatever criteria you might have for this success. And again, from the small conversation we had just before, we can find things that are in the in different sides of the spectrum, like the Aristotelian virtues, which is a middle point between two things. So again, in one side we can put experience, and the other side you can find instruction. And something which is also raised here, which I think very interesting, because of the standards we create from our social way of understanding music, that comes a lot from this idea of CDs being perfect, concerts have to be perfect, is the idea of the final product that has to be perfect, and or the process that will allow you to make mistakes. To make mistakes might be very, very, very valuable. For instance, I read a lot about sports because of methodological reasons, because in particular, there is a sport I like very much and I follow it closely. So I read a lot about sports methodology. And you often find elite sportists to say they learn more from losing than from winning. So it's when they lose that they get a lot of good information that makes them to get better, because they also all hate to lose. So this is things more related to this idea that I was speaking at the beginning of the mindset. How can we modulate our thought processes? And again, there are conscious ways of doing it, but the larger part would be unconscious, I think.
Okay, thank you very much, Pedro. This is about to finish the discussion. I wanted to make a connection with something that Stratton said in his intervention, that I can connect also to one idea that we didn't discuss, but actually it was appearing now with the word improvisation and all of that. There was from Stratton this idea that in a way a part of the fire of the early music movement has in a way extinguished. It cannot be the same. I was wondering if it might be the case that the fire has also to start in other aspects. So like it needs new combustible material, and in that way that might be the thing that Pedro is pointing to when he says that we can be witnessing a change into this historically formed musician that includes much more the other skills and improvisation and historical pedagogy, and of course connected to what I'm calling musica practica. And I don't know if you see that there could be a fire now, but it cannot be in the same place. It needs to be somewhere else, maybe.
Can I just say something about that, Isaac? I'm sorry. I think institutions are the music schools are the perfect place to do that, because they don't have the pressure of having a result that is going to be sellable.
Right,
so if we don't do that, nobody's going to make it. I feel very privileged by being a teacher in a university, because I can take risks there that I could never take in the professional life.
That's for sure. Stratton wanted to add something also.
No, I just think your idea of music is a great one for getting the fire. I mean, that fire was all about discovery. You can only do discovery once, right?
Exactly.
That first generation, like that was like a revelation at the time. Well, it's not a revelation anymore. It sounds what we've heard for the last 40 years. But this new attitude to craftsmanship as being at the core we're doing, and not some idea of the brilliant 19th century artist, but as the craftsman who's really in there learning about improvising and learning about non-written traditions. I do think that's one of the ways forward.
Okay, maybe Teresa, Michael, Michael, sorry, Michael. Do you want to add something?
At the moment, I think that, yeah, we can find fire in every aspect of music or culture. Yeah, and we can always try to dig deeper and combine in new ways. And I think that the generation that is now doesn't have to struggle with the same technical problems that the first generation of early music had, can look again and will, if they look, discover the things in a completely new way. So I think there's lots of possibilities to easily light a new fire.
Okay, so let me just then maybe finish this, close it with, of course, giving thanks to Pedro, and but I'm going to stay with him. So specifically, I wanted to thank Straton, Teresa, and Michael for your participation and for very nice ideas and a very nice discussion. Now I think you should go to the Huva again, and then you choose another discussion. I would say we can just get started, and if some other people is joining in the meantime, that's okay. I have already selected a few ideas from Pedro, and I would be asking him about those. But it would be very nice if actually now we start from you guys, from the people in the chat. Asking some ideas or I mean asking some questions or proposing some ideas regarding what you have gathered from Pedro's video. If anyone wants to start, if we don't have volunteers, I will take the lead. That's no problem also. We have one more. Teunis is arriving now. Teunis, I was just saying now that you guys can directly start if you want to say something, and otherwise I have some extracted topics from what Pedro said.
Yes, please.
Okay, then I will go for it. Yeah. So we have a word that came in Pedro's speech in the video that for me it's very charged, and it would need maybe a little bit of discussion. The idea of ethics connected to early music. So the idea that for him, historically informed performance practice is actually a question of ethics. And I was wondering myself if this ethics regards the sort of like the original meaning of the word in Greek. So sort of like the things you do, the translated in Latin as mores. So the standard way of conducting yourself, and connected with the idea of the of early music or historical informed performance practice more as a process than as a goal. And maybe Pedro wants to comment a little bit on that, and then we can open the discussion.
Hello to all. Let me say again that it's a very big pleasure and honor to be in this panel. I was, before when faced with this question, I remembered a lecture once given by Bart Kalken, and he gave a very interesting thought experience that might help to understand what I mean by this ethical posture or positioning of the individual, of the performer. So he was asking us to think about a diagram, a chart with two axes, X's and Y's, and in one axis to put in each side the performer and the work. And in the other axis to put the composer and the audience. And he was giving this exercise so each one would think how we put ourselves in this diagram. So if when performing we are more focused in the ideas that we find in the composition, our creativity, or if you are striving more to understand what the composer wanted to convey in that particular work. And in the other axis, the idea, if you want more to be a performer concerned with what the audience is going to react to your performance, or trying to look for this chimerical idea of the music, how the composer would have listened in his head. Of course, this is just a thought experience, but it means it's a good way of understanding what I mean by this ethics of the performer. And it's already something that has been discussed in the previous panel, because I would add two dimensions of this axis of this chart, which is your end game, your end goal. That might be a concert or a CD, etc. So the result, the final result, or the process. So what do you learn, how your mental state changes, how your experience of making music is being modulated by the fact that you undertake certain paths, certain methodological paths. So this is more or less what I mean by the ethics.
Yeah, sorry. One thing that I like very much of that is the idea of oneself changing by doing music in a specific way. Yeah, like we shall be changed with this idea. Yeah, this that is actually in sacred text. Yeah, in mutabimur. Yeah, we shall be changed by the experience, and it's not just a question of the result, but what we learn in the process in a way.
Oh, I think that a performer that does not change is a bad performer. That is my personal opinion. I'm sorry, but we are permeable. It's not thinkable for me to think that we are going to be immutable from a large period of time.
Okay, so any questions about this? Any thoughts? Let's break the ice. Go, Teunis.
Yeah, I was very touched by what Pedro said about the early music label of sonority. I think that's a very interesting point of view, and it relates, in my point of view, to what Taraskin called the modernist style that early music sounded to him like, in a way. And I think it's kind of almost unavoidable that things become a style. It relates to a tendency that we all have to look for security. And this might be especially difficult for students to get rid of that wish for security. And I think that should be a responsibility of us, of the early music movement, to help people find a way out of this almost trap. And I'm very, very curious for your opinions if you see ways out of this, ways out of the early music style as such.
I never thought about that, but I'm going to explain you why, I hope. Some things you can see them as problems or as characteristics. I don't think that the inevitability of musical experience, especially when they become, when you have significant numbers, like the explosion of ensembles, the explosion of CDs, the explosion of festivals, there is this concept that comes from biology called autopoietically. I don't know if you can say that in English. Autopoiesis is a concept in biology where biological systems, they evolve in a way that is unpredictable, because it's part of the ways they interact inside the system. And social systems are also they share these characteristics. So I don't think we cannot really predict what the direction things will be. And you can try to steer them, but in a way they will always have some kind of autonomy that will make this exercise to be difficult to make, or maybe even infructiferous. But I also don't think you need to see them as problems in which a certain problem arises. So let's say, just to be very practical, the fact that the vast majority of Baroque orchestras playing, let's say, French music, Baroque French, share an idea of sonority that would be promoted by the Baroque orchestras making a lot of this repertory, let's say in 1980s. That is a characteristic. It does not necessarily has to be a problem in which one from a personal perspective finds it a problem. Of course, we are not in exact sciences, so there is not really the borderline between right or wrong. But we are all here, I think, discussing things from an institutional perspective, which is academic. And this was actually something that I said in the previous panel in the end, but now we can put it forward. I think academic institutions, music schools in this case, they can take a lot of models of functioning that might come from the professional world. And you see, in fact, many music institutions are already pre-professional laboratories that will facilitate the arrival of our students in the professional world. We all know, and students know, that if they go to certain schools, the possibility that, so let's say, if you are a Baroque violinist and if you go to study with a certain teacher in a certain school, the possibility of, if you do well, to start being called by the orchestras where this professor is playing is high. So this is not necessarily a problem, but it's something the way it is. But at the same time, institutions, academic institutions, academia does not have the pressure of achieving certain kinds of results, such when you have that you are presenting a recording to play in the festival, etc., etc. And this gives you a freedom that maybe we could use more. Maybe we could take more risks instead of inside our institutions, and to try to put programs that are not really pressured by the idea that you have to achieve certain kinds of results that have to be considered valid. This is not only a problem in music. This is actually a discussion that exact sciences are having now because of the way the publication, the papers are published in let's say Nature or something like that, because there is a lot of pressure to publish papers that achieve results. And some part of the scientific community says that there should be more papers publishing. We could not find any result, because this is statistically what happens more in the life of a researcher, let's say mathematics or physics or biology or whatever. So I think maybe we could do more to this way. And what will come after that, we don't know, but for sure there will be interesting things coming from that.
I just wanted to capture a couple of words. Yeah, Teunis mentioned the word safety. Yeah, that's very important. And Pedro mentioned the word risk. Yeah, sort of like seeing how it might be that our students are looking for safety, and it might be that we have to encourage them for risk. Pedro said that in a way institutions that are like our institutions, we don't have the pressure. This is maybe not always 100% correct, because sometimes conservatories are also measured by the fact how many of the students have won that competition or that other competition, or how many of your students are making a successful career. So this happens also in the world of conservatories. But you're right that we have to go for it. And just to comment on this safety aspect, might it be that early music was born as a movement in a moment where the Western world was too safe about itself and it needed to be questioned? And nowadays we are in a world which is not safe anymore about itself. Yeah, not sure anymore about itself, and students need to find safety somewhere, somehow. And I just don't mean to conquer the discussion now, to take over it. So whoever wants to participate, just raise your hand. There is an icon to do that in Zoom. But if you can just open your microphone and speak. If it gets too messy, I will try to control it a bit. Caroline.
Yes. Hi. I was just wondering about, you were talking about this freedom versus security, that we all need those two poles. How is it possible? I don't know if you guys have experimented within your institutions. How is it possible to leave more freedom to students to choose their own, to create their own curriculum inside an institution? I don't know if you have experiences with that.
Let me just go back a little bit. What I meant before is that institutions should be ideally free from the pressure, but 2020, of course, it's not that, and for sure it's not that in my institution. And I have to struggle every day in order to have a niche space for it. The idea of freedom, security is also a personal decision. What might be something safe for me might not be for my colleague. We all know some musicians. I know some musicians that their only concern is just to have enough money to eat, and others not. They want to have a nice car, etc. This is a personal discussion. What Caroline is saying about the idea of a freedom curriculum, this is a very interesting discussion modernly, because I don't think the idea of freedom versus security is related to curriculum design. And I think there is a modern tendency post-Bologna in which we have to blame everything on the curriculum. I have been in meetings for some years. I was the international coordinator of my school. And I have been in meetings where it was discussed if Erasmus students should have academic credits, so SETS, for going to museums of the country where they were visiting, by learning the language, etc. And for me, this is so strange, because something that is, again, go back to the word ethics, should be the ethical part of one person to know if I'm in Amsterdam, if I want to go to the Van Gogh Museum or not, should be not necessary to have a kind of label of certification. Yes, you behaved well, so you take 1 credit because you went to the Van Gogh Museum. And I think academic institutions often fall in this trap. In my sake, this is a problem. I think we should not try to transform everything as a curricular procedure, because this conveys the idea that everything that you have to do somewhere can be translated in an instructive path. And I'm not such a fan, this is personally, of instruction as the principal way of communicating, of learning, let's say. I think it's valid. I think there are many others that we could explore more, but this is my personal perspective. So the question, and I have been involved in curriculum designs a couple of times in my life. I was responsible for design of the curriculum of the early music department in Porto, also then of the master in artistic performance for all the instruments. So I have had a little bit of experience of being involved directly in these discussions. And I think we need to struggle the tendency of making a kind of, I don't know how to say in English, in Portuguese it's caderno de encargos. So when, for instance, when an architect makes a project, then the constructor has an item of everything that he should put on that. I think curricula should give the guidelines for what the general training should be. And of course, like I think somebody was saying now, I think it was Toinus, that we have a part of our profession that is related to a craftsmanship. So there is a very essential part in which you need to put that in the center of the curriculum, because we all need to learn motor skills that are going to be the main interface for expressing ourselves in our instrument. And this is a biomechanical process that you cannot bypass. So these kind of landmarks of touchstones of our activity should be the center of our curriculum, I think. Let's say instrument, performance ensemble, etc. But in the other dimension, I think curriculums have to be have a lot of flexibility in order to allow institutions to experiment whatever they want to experiment. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, very good. And actually, it's a good thing to hear, because we're always also talking about these things, about simplifying a little bit curriculum, and not trying to transform everything into credits and all of that, because also the weight, the amount of work with bureaucracy and everything, it gets always tougher and tougher on the administration and on the teachers themselves. Tony,
Just add something that I think. Sorry, I'm sorry. I was a student when I did my bachelor and my major. I was a student in a place where there was not a music department, so my curriculum was the same, exactly the same as a pianist, as a violinist, etc. I never felt that this was conditioning my liberty of addressing the areas that I wanted. Access to information, yes. So to have a good library, to have a good possibility to listen to recordings, to access to critical mass, so to persons with whom I could speak about things to learn from, yes. But curriculum itself, I never felt that was a limitation. This is my personal input, okay?
Tony, please.
Yes, thank you. I like very much what you said, Pedro, about craftsmanship. I think that is the core of our education. At the same time, I remember from the previous discussion I was in that Stefan Gries left us with the question, what is the added value of the early music movement? What has been the added value? And I think then we come to the research component. The research component has always been at the core of the early music departments, and it still is. And I think that's something that the rest of the conservatory has learned from us, and that's an element that we should not underestimate. And I think if we put the research very central, next, of course, to the craftsmanship, that these things go together, and that students learn to make projects out of their practicing. I'm thinking of the research that the Academy of Ancient Music did for 2 years before they even started rehearsing the Brockes Passion. 2 years of studying the 15 different manuscripts, coming with a new edition of the piece and discussing things as an orchestra with the soloists. And then they started to rehearse, and they started to make the actual recording. I think that is an example of some of the fantastic things, some of the kind of attitude that we have to offer, and that we should nurture, that we should nourish. And yeah, that's important. And the curriculum, I think, ideally should be constructed in a way that students are craving for it, that they really love to go there, and and that means there is a strong connection between, again, the two components, the research and the actual craftsmanship. If we manage to make that connection, I think that all students love to go to the lessons and learn like that. But of course, again, very curious for your thoughts about this.
Well, it's absolutely a crucial question, I think. Let me say before that the idea of the concepts of research in arts have also changed a lot, I think, in the last 20, 30 years. And there is now this very generally accepted idea that when you are making art, if a painter is painting, he's also researching in a way. And I don't think there are many institutions now that resist to this thought. George Steiner says in a very small book, something that I like a lot, that he says that, giving the example of a sculpture, for instance, that the stone has a syntax of its own. So the materials have syntaxes, and the stone has its syntaxes, and we cannot transform that in words. So in a way, research in arts and research in creativity has a validity that cannot be transformed in words, has its own validity associated to its means. What I mean by that is when a pianist is thinking about, well, how to perform, I don't know, a Brahms ballad, is also researching. Maybe he won't be able to translate all of his research in words, but result itself is thought in action. It's criticism in action. But it's very true that in early music, I think there was, because our repertoire was before we put hands on it, let's say performers put their hands on it, there was already from the 19th century a huge musicological community that was interesting on that. Of course, we drank a lot from the musicological world. And I think one of the validities of the interesting things, contributions of the early music movement, was to approach musicologists and performers. I don't know if you listened to an interview with Margaret Bent. Because of this initiative of Rema and AEC, I found out that there was a podcast, and I was going to listen to the episodes. And just this week, there was this interview with Margaret Bent, and she was still speaking in 2020 of this very strong opposition between performance and musicologists, almost like being enemies, and how that has changed in the last years, but still it's a little bit there. So early music performers had a strong musicological side, and some of them are actually doing very, very well in both worlds. And I think this was very valuable contribution, because first of all, it was a kind of demonstration that you could actually make both and be very good in making both if you want. So you don't need to put musical performance and music thought, written, musicology in opposite sides of the field. And then that the idea of philology, of going to the sources and to put them in the original context, in the original language, etc., would be in the core. And there I would agree to you that I think in an early music curriculum, this is my personal perspective, and this was, for instance, how we designed the curriculum of Porto. The study of sources have to be in the center of the attention also. What we try to do, it's not to do it from a typological perspective. What I mean by that is that we are not going to say, okay, now we are going to speak about temperaments, Ramos says this, Werkmeister says, etc., etc., or we are going to speak about inégalité, you're going to read Quantz or Auster or whatever. What we do is we try to give them tools to read the sources. So usually what we do is we select a source, we try to be different every time. Of course, there are some that are very important and need to go back to them every now and then, but we try to teach or to show them how you approach a document, rather than say, I'm going to play inégalité in this manner because Quantz prescribed it this manner. Because this was also a tendency that we observed a lot in the last years. People steered away from the sources, the idea that we need to study sources, to just learn the content of them as new instructions. And I think this idea is very anti-historical. For instance, how to do a porte de voix in French Baroque. If you are looking for a deterministic answer to that, then you can follow very exactly the rule, for instance, that says that the porte de voix should last at least half of the note, or at least 2/3 of the note if it is a dot note. That could be a perspective to receive the instruction. The other perspective is if, for instance, Bassi speaks about 7 different ways of making a porte de voix, that's because it's a symptom of the variety. And for me, to get closer to this perspective of what the sources are expressing about the characteristics of, in this case, a musical culture, is far more valuable than the exact examples that they are giving.
Good, thank you very much. Then I would like to steer a little bit the discussion to another item that you were talking about in your video, if that is okay. But if someone wants to ask something else, that's also perfectly good. There was I'm connecting with the idea of added value that Teunis was commenting on. That is really a very important question, because it's really, we have to face ourselves. Yeah, we have to put ourselves on the in front of the mirror and say what has the early music movement brought into musical life as a whole. Then of course the research attitude is central, and very much like Pedro is saying, the research idea is expanded now, so that artistic research is also criticism in action. I take your expression because I really like it very much. Criticism in action. Criticism in
It's
action.
from Steiner. It's from George Steiner, not mine.
Okay, your Steiner. Okay, criticism in action. Very good. But I wanted to just add some little thing that for this added value, and is that there are a lot of skills that have been gained in the meantime, even if these skills were in a way recovered for performance practice reasons, they have become skills and they have changed the landscape of the musical world. Take original instruments. Yeah, the original reason, the reason to take on them is because they, I mean, performance practice reasons, and you have to play on the original instruments, so the repertoire matches the instruments and all of that. But once you learn how to make music with an original instrument, this has changed your musical skills forever. And it's even if you go back immediately to modern instruments, you will never be the same. So the skills themselves as the added value, the skill of playing the original instruments changes how music has functioned afterwards. And the case that I always mention, the success case of basso continuo, the original reason was because Baroque music needs basso continuo to be realized in an improvised manner, etc., etc. But once you have learned to play basso continuo, music is never the same anymore. Yeah, once you have the skill of improvising from a bass line and understand the implications of that bass line and understand harmony and counterpoint from all of that, the music is completely different. And I say this because in connection with my colleagues of the theory department, the classical theory department, many of them are now doing like basso continuo, partimento stuff and all of that. And the way they teach harmony has been completely changed. The reason being the criticism in action that early music specialists have been doing in the last 30 or 40 years by being able to do that. And they have discovered that actually harmony is completely different when you learn this, and that you can teach it in this way. So connected to this, you talk about a possible transition, change of emphasis from the repertory to the language, which is something that I find very resonating with what I think. And you're mentioning historical pedagogy, and this is in a way an extension of this Dionysiacal way that you mentioned of learning about early music. It's not just the sources, but the practice-based skills that you are trained into, that gives you an immersion into that culture of the past. And that culture of the past, you say, it's really important, not just in itself, but also to understand our own culture, what the developments that have happened in history, what we have gained and we have lost in the time. Yeah, sorry, because this is like maybe rephrasing what you said, but I find all these things to connect in a way. Maybe you want to comment on that, and maybe other people want to ask some question.
Well, yes. So the idea of Apollos versus Dionysius, it comes from Nietzsche, and in short, it means that our evolution of our modern society has put the word, the verb in the center, and the instruction in the center of our main interface with the world. So you can see, for instance, there is no society ever that reads as much as we do today. This is a fact. This is not what I'm saying. Of course, this is everything we read, like posting Facebook, a newspaper, the publicity in the roads, etc., etc. But this is a fact. Our principal interface to understand the world is very visual and verbal, and apparently it has not been so. And there has been a shift from the validity of our interpretation of the world that comes through the other senses, and especially I will speak about our orality here, which is the main tool for us musicians. So what we hear, that's somehow lost validity because they seem to be less objective. And we are very, very conditioned by this thought today because, like I was saying before, we want to learn how we are going to do something. We read about that. We hear our teacher giving an instruction about that. So this is the principal path to develop this skill. The thing about words is that they might have two characteristics that might be problematic. The first is that you develop a false sense that you can express everything in words, and this is far from being true. There is a lot of ideas that are ineffable. The second problem of words, it's words, they convey also meta meanings. So for instance, I teach methodology and didactics in our education master, and I give this example a lot to the students. The amount of times we say the word concern in a music lesson should be a reason for concern. Sorry for the tautology. Because when you are saying to a student, okay, now play it again and be concerned about your tuning. I think concern, this is now my personal expression, my opinion, the idea of introducing concern in playing should be not desirable. It develops something called fear-based performance, and we do that without having any kind of bad intention every day. Chalabi says that the word no is the thing that you most repeat in a rehearsal. So a rehearsal, I think it says exactly something. A rehearsal is an incantation of no's. So don't play that wrong note, don't make that rallentando, not so strong, etc., etc., etc. And the word no as a negative affection that without realizing it, we are bringing that to our relation with the student, to our relation with music, to our relation with the instrument, okay? So I think something that is very interesting when you go to sources that relate to pedagogy in older times is that orality, or the idea of what you learn through your ears, was more in the center. For instance, we have a lot of information of, or significant amount of information about how music was studied in Latin schules in Lutheran Germany. So one of the revolutions of the Reformation by Luther was the way education was made. So at the time there was this schools called schools of Latin. There were, let's say, the ancestors of our general public instruction. So people would learn mathematics, to read, etc., and music also. And music was in the center of everything event. For instance, every day would start with singing, but also every lesson would start with singing. So if you would go to have a mathematics lesson, you would start mathematics lesson by singing something in the beginning. So this is the idea of orality. And we have a lot of prints of books used in this context. So I think if you take the earlier, that must be around 1530 somethings, and the later, that would be 16. A lot you find more than hundreds of books that were printed and reprinted to be used as tutors. Today we call them treatises, but they were not treatises, they were just tutors. They were guides for the teacher to use in this classroom context. But now the interesting thing was that, and I'm quoting by Art, I might be a little bit imprecision about numbers I'm going to give, but students until they were 7 years old, they would not read from the book. They would just listen to the teacher and imitate. Then until they were before 12 or 13, something like that, they would access to written information on the board, but they would not have the book. And after that, after 13 until they were 18, they would have the book. So the book that today is the center of our instructive educational process was only coming in a very late stage of their process. So that means that the main tool that they would have for the lesson would be via what they would listen. And something which is very interesting about these these tutors, I should not call them treatises, is the way they generally act, which is you give a concept, for instance, the concept of hexachords. And what we are going to do next? A lot of music around that hexachord. Then you'd need another concept, like, for instance, mutation. What are you going to do next? A lot of exercises like Vicini and canons around mutations. Then you give another example, modes. You're going to teach modes. What are you going to next? Canons or Vicini around the modes. So the idea of every concept that you are learning in a descriptive manner, it's not illustrated, it's actually expressed immediately by a live, we would call it performance today, they would just call it making music probably.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you very much, Pedro. We are already 1 minute.
I'm sorry, it's so much.
Yeah, beyond the time. We just have to close. We don't have time even to say bye-bye here. So I see you bye-bye. I say you bye-bye in the other Zoom room.